and get started. I'm Jennifer Pereira, the President and CEO of Cal Chamber, and we are so delighted to have the Director of the Department of Finance here with us today, Keely Bosler, to go ahead and present to us the governor's recently released budget. Before I turn it over to Keely to do her presentation, I'm going to give a brief introduction of Keely, although she probably doesn't need much of an introduction to this group. She's pretty well known, but nonetheless, to give her some kudos for her impressive background. So Keely, as I mentioned, is the Director of Department of Finance. She was appointed to that position by Governor Brown in August of 2018, and then reappointed by Governor Newsom to that position in December of 2018. Before that, Keely worked as the Cabinet Secretary for Governor Brown and also as a Deputy Director in the Department of Finance. Prior to working for the administration, she had several different positions, all in budget and fiscal analysis. She was the Staff Director for the Senate Budget and Fiscal Analysis Committee. She was also an Associate Director for the California Department of Corrections with regards to their Budget Management Committee. And then prior to that, she worked in the Legislative Analyst Office doing fiscal analysis for that office. So quite a distinguished career so far. And she is an alumni of Cal State University Chico, a fellow Cal State grad. Kudos to that. And she has a master's degree from Cornell University. So Keely, thank you so much for being here with us virtually. I want to thank everybody for being flexible. We had the best of intentions of doing this in person, but of course, wanted to make sure everybody was safe and healthy. And so we had to move this to virtual at the last moment, and really appreciate everyone's flexibility, including Keely. So with that, Keely, thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here today and to present to you the governor's 22-23 budget. And I've got just a few slides to walk through today with you all. And I look forward to taking questions at the end as well. So let me just take a moment to share my screen. The economic conditions in the state have continued to improve, and so have the state's revenues, and that's reflected in the governor's budget that was presented on Monday. This is enabling the state to invest in addressing some of the state's greatest threats, the pandemic that we are all, that's very much on the front burner right now as we speak with Omicron, climate change, homelessness, inequality, and then finally, but definitely not least, keeping our streets safe. The budget makes significant investments as well to continue the state's economic growth and to strengthen California's future in a way that includes more Californians. That's really the goal behind a lot of the investments that I'll talk about today. I'm starting with a very wonky economic slide. This reflects the jobs numbers here in our economy, and I've got a lot going on, so I'm just going to give you a little bit. But obviously, the red line is the COVID-19 recession, starting in March of before the pandemic, and then the depth of that second quarter of 2020. And then you see what ended up being a much more of a V-shaped recovery. And we actually now forecast that jobs will recover to their pre-pandemic levels 3 quarters earlier than the forecast we put out in the May revision. And that's at the end of 2022, so Q4 of 2022. I have these other lines on this chart because I think it's just really illustrative of how different this recession was compared to others that we have experienced here in California. The dotted green line that's at the bottom, that represents the job recovery in the after the Great Recession. And so you can see how many more years we had until jobs had recovered there. The purple line is the recession from the 1990s. And then the blue line at the top that's dashed represents the dot-com bust that really started in 2000, 2001. So really, really different recession that we just came off of. I always, whenever I'm talking to our economists in our department, we're going to be studying this period. The economics field is going to be studying it for decades to come. It was such an unusual time. And with that, I think, there are a lot of things that it's really hard to use the same old playbook. You really need to think about what new things are around the corner. One of the things that's really been plaguing us in the latter part of 2021 has been inflation and supply chain issues. I do not have to tell this group about those issues. And we do assume that they will linger the remainder of this calendar year. That's what's in our forecast, but that they will resolve themselves, and we will return to more of our long-term pre-pandemic trends of inflation that are slightly above 3%. Our forecast does assume about $14 billion in additional infrastructure spending that's going to be coming from the federal government, from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That will be received over the next 5 years, and our estimates are that it will create nearly 75,000 jobs at its peak in 2025. Overall, all of these economic conditions are really part of the reason why general fund revenue is up. The budget reflects nearly $200 billion in general fund revenue. For those of you that have been watching the state's budget, that number will be, for many years, will be significant to you. That's 12% higher than the last budget due to the following factors: the improved economic forecast, a greater share of wage gains going to higher wage sectors, and then a stronger stock market. I will come to that in the next slide. And then finally, higher inflation as well as driving the revenue forecast. We have gains across all three of the big revenues. That's personal income tax, sales tax, and then corporate tax as well. But a little bit more about the stock market. And I know many of you know about the volatility that is inherent in our revenue structure. We are very dependent on income tax. Income tax is very skewed we have a large amount of the income tax that comes from a very small number of payers. And so that causes historically a lot of these boom and bust cycles. This is just a picture of the capital gains realizations. We are at a record level of $25 billion in revenues attributed to capital gains. And we are approaching the prior peak levels in 2000 and 2007. Those are the two spikes you see on the way up to what is the current capital gains realization. So these are things that we worry about at the Department of Finance because we want to make sure that we have enough built-in resiliency in our fiscal plan to withstand a decline in the stock market. So the stock market, and as per always, always remains a risk in our forecast that nobody can know safely today what's going to happen on that. Another thing, obviously, we put our forecasts together when we're building the governor's budget in the late November, early December. So we did not have we did not project the Omicron variant and the surge that we're currently experiencing. So that's something that we're watching really closely, as all of you are, in the economic data that will come out to really better understand in our May forecast what this current surge is doing to our overall economy and recovery. So this is why one of the foundations that this budget is built on is a strong fiscal foundation. We do have $34.6 billion in reserves. This includes $20.9 billion that's in that rainy day fund. That fund is a much more restrictive reserve fund that's set aside only in the event that there is a fiscal emergency. Overall, we estimate that we have a $45.7 billion budget surplus That's made up of several components, some of them driven by constitutional formulas that if you've been watching the budget, you know we have several of those. One of them is Proposition 98. That funds our K-14 schools. We have a $16 billion in additional school funding to allocate in this budget. We also have $20.6 billion in what is the discretionary non-Proposition 98 surplus. This is the surplus money that the governor and the legislature have the most flexibility on how to allocate. Of those monies, we are allocating 86% of those monies to one-time expenditures. That's really important because it is much harder to reverse and change ongoing commitments, changes in entitlements, and other ongoing expenditures that would have to have statutory changes to affect them at some point. We also have $9 billion going to both build up that rainy day fund, as well as continue to make progress in paying down the state's retirement liabilities. This budget allocates an additional nearly $4 billion this year to those retirement liabilities. And just a little bit more about, why we are in a better place than we've been prior to those other peaks, the dot-com bust, the Great Recession, is we have paid off all of our budgetary debts that had accumulated over the last several decades. We continue to be focused on a structural balance over the multi-year period through 25, 26. We do show a structural surplus in that year in our budget planning. Of course, the further you go out on both revenue estimates and expenditure estimates, the more uncertainty there is. But it's really important to plan for that structural balance over the long term. Now I'm going to jump into how we're spending and how we're allocating some of this budget. The first is obviously continuing to do everything we can to reduce community spread and to save lives from the COVID-19 pandemic. We have $2.7 billion in additional funding for direct response. This includes more community testing, more vaccines and boosters, especially getting into those communities that have had less acceptance of the vaccines with different strategies, making sure we have personal protection equipment. And then the last one, which is a very present issue, is additional surge staffing for our hospitals around the state that are finding themselves short given the pandemic. I also would be remiss in not mentioning the governor has called for a new emergency supplemental paid sick leave program. The one we had last year, as this group knows well, expired in September. We have not said reinstate that. We have said we need to look at the science, we need to look at the conditions, and we need to come up with a proposal that makes sense, given that the conditions are quite different this year. But given how difficult the surge has become, we feel this is important protection for our workplaces and for our workforce that we need to come together and work on. I'm going to go back into education next. It's always a big story in the budget, but this year is particularly good. We have what we call an education and parents agenda. The budget includes the highest level of Proposition 98 funding, state funding ever, at $102 billion. The yellow parts of the bar denote the new money. So that all told adds up to that $16.1 billion that I mentioned. Per pupil, this translates into $15,261 per student. And when you include total funds, it's nearly $21,000 per student. This includes the phased implementation of a very significant policy for the state, which is extending transitional kindergarten to all 4-year-olds in the state, with full implementation of that policy in 2025-26. We're also adding more childcare, more subsidized childcare slots, with the goal of adding 200,000 additional slots by 25-26. And then finally, the budget includes a major investment in after school and summer programs, extended learning programs to address some of the losses that we've experienced during the pandemic, but also to support parents in their ability to work by putting together a full day of care and a full year of care for many families. We've also been able to invest in universal meals, special education, and also we have a new proposal around early literacy in this budget as well. But one of the things the governor is really passionate about is the development of really strengthening these career pathways. And so we have a significant proposal, $1.5 billion in the K-12 side, to do more of these regional localized pathways for students in 4 key areas that we see as really being in demand areas in our economy. The first is education, including early education, healthcare, all types of healthcare workers, technology, and then finally climate change related fields as well. Another thing that the governor pushed the finance director very hard on was making it a longer term commitment to our higher education systems for sustained growth. We have agreed to compacts with all of our higher education segments. What a compact means is really an agreement for a sustained amount of funding over a 5-year period. And in that compact, we also have embedded several key goals that we want the universities to achieve with those increased resources. So we have in the compacts, we have expanding access for California students, reducing the total cost of college for families by providing a timely way to complete your degree in 4 years, if that's your terminus, BA, BS, or associate's degree, closing equity gaps, and then finally carrying on with the K-12 proposal. We want the higher education systems to be integrated with the K-12 systems, and then ultimately also with employers on pathways, these specific pathways I mentioned earlier: education, healthcare, technology, and climate change. So we're very excited about our higher education budget this year. Getting to the economic growth and job creation section here, these are all things that the top one here I know is one that you all have been working on for the last several years. We are very appreciative of the balanced approach we took in 2020 during the bottom of the COVID recession, but we are proposing to restore the R&D and NOL limitations, to restore those tax credits 1 year early. So we had planned for 3 years. We'd like to end that 1 year early. That is actually our estimates, because there's been an increase in all of the revenues, that it's now a policy that's worth about $5.5 billion. So obviously a significant piece of what we've allocated resources to. The next is we have some ideas around some new tax credits that we wanted to put out there, really to solidify our leadership in the world, frankly, on climate change and climate change innovations that are developed here in California. And we are such a leader because of so many wonderful companies that are headquartered here in California. But we wanted to provide additional incentives to have that research be done here in California. So we have a new $250 million a year for 3 years tax credit for companies headquartered here in California that are investing in research and development around climate change. We also have $100 million per year for 3-year new credit to spur development in the new green energy industries. This is an opt-in credit, and we have proposed a slightly different mechanism or arrangement for this credit, in which if you take the credit, then you would be in a contract with the state in order to return the credit and a share of profits back to the state that we could then invest in more innovation and also help to support all Californians. We are also proposing to support the development of Lithium Valley. We are very fortunate to have this naturally occurring resource here in California, which is a key component of advanced battery manufacturing, and we want to support the development of that industry through certainty in the regulatory structure, but then also in a way that creates good jobs and also is able to provide benefit to that surrounding community down in the Imperial Valley. And then finally, we're making a sizable investment in research and development at the University of California, excuse me, $100 million for applied research. And then we're also proposing to invest in a new network of technology incubators, which will include a workforce training component as well. So we're really excited about these investments and just keeping California on that cutting edge of all of the innovations and inventions that the world needs to make the transition away from fossil fuels. The budget also includes a significant number of proposals around strengthening small business. The first one obviously supports all employers in the state, but with a $3 billion in general fund that we would propose to send to the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund debt. As many of you know, we have quite a large debt to the federal government at this stage. And that will be paid down over time. The state is going to start to pay interest payments this year on that debt, and we will pay interest payments for as long as that debt is outstanding. But that also is triggering reductions in federal tax credits to employers. And so this will be a benefit as it will help to get to paying this debt off quicker over the next several years. We're also proposing tax conformity for some of the additional grants and loans that were provided subsequent to the PPP last year that just didn't get caught up in our policy changes last year. This we estimate is going to provide around $500 million in additional state tax relief over the next several years. We are also making an ongoing investment in those technical assistance programs that are throughout the state that help new business owners put together their business plans and start their businesses. We also have new entrepreneurship grants and we are also proposing to expand the iHub programs around the state as well. We also have fee waivers for all new business startups in the budget year. And then we continue to provide additional support to the tourism industry, given the significant impacts that industry continues to have from the pandemic. And we are looking forward to much improved over the year as the pandemic and international travel resumes. In addition to all of those investments, we also are expanding workforce training and opportunity with a few different items. These are all in addition to the higher education investments and the K-12 investments that certainly have a tangential and direct impact. But we also have $1.7 billion initiative to expand our health and human services workforce. We're obviously seeing the stress of this pandemic on that workforce, and we need a lot more individuals trained, especially acute in certain regions of the state. So this is from everything from all types of nursing staff, all types of behavioral health staff, social workers as well. And many of the strategies in this 1.7 billion, I think, are really unique to address targeted needs in rural areas, for example, and really excited about some of the strategies there to get the workers we need in the state. We also last year made a multi-billion-dollar investment in teacher pipeline. We have additional investments this year, again, some unique strategies to expand those teacher preparation programs. Some of them targeted so that, again, rural areas that don't have close access to a CSU or a UC will be able to complete a teacher preparation program through a local community college. We also have several different strategies around climate-related workforce proposals. Those are through the Workforce Development Board, as well as at the UC. And then specific to the transitions that we're already starting to see around the oil and gas industry, we have a $200 million abandoned oil and gas well capping initiative, and then an additional 15 million that would be used for a pilot project to retrain oil and gas industry workers to be able to work on that well capping initiative. And we also are creating a new fund to specifically support displaced workers from that industry. Infrastructure is a huge story in this budget, and that's not just because of the federal government's historic package that we'll be seeing that is reflected in our budget. We have an additional $20 billion in state funding over the next few years for additional infrastructure investments above what was committed to last year. That includes $9.1 billion for transportation. Some of you may remember that last year at the end of the legislative session, we were not able to come to a conclusion on a transportation package last year. So we have come back with that $4.2 billion in Proposition 1A bond money that is dedicated for the high-speed rail, and asked for appropriation of that, as well as $4.9 billion general fund package of a variety of investments that really help to transition our transportation infrastructure away from vehicles and away from greenhouse gas emissions to more transit, more bike and pedestrian, as well as some climate adaptation. In addition to that, though, we also have a significant investment in goods movement and especially around our ports. We've been spending a lot of time this last fall really understanding the bottlenecks and the issues around our logistics and goods movement industry and the limitations. And so 1.2 billion is for infrastructure that will ease some of that congestion. We also have a $110 million investment in a new workforce training center in Southern California. And then finally, we have 70 million. Portion of that is for the Department of Motor Vehicles to expand its capabilities to license more commercial truck drivers, and then additional investments in data improvements at the ports especially. We have a massive infusion in transitioning our transportation sector to more zero emission vehicles. This is on top of a very large proposal last year. So all in, we've got $10 billion over the next 5 years for zero emission vehicles. This includes strategies, everything from getting more low-income vehicles or more vehicles into low-income communities, plus the infrastructure, as well as significant investments in heavy-duty trucks, including those drayage trucks that go to and from the port to different storage areas. We continue to make investments in our clean energy sector. We have 2 billion general fund allocated there. And this was another thing that we made a proposal about last year, but we didn't come to a conclusion with the legislature. So we've come back with a slightly revised plan, All of this is about making sure that we have reliability and we are able to transition our current energy sector into a more green energy sector going forward. Finally, I just want to highlight an additional $2 billion for affordable housing. This is $1.5 billion in general fund directly for grants for affordable housing projects, including mixed income projects, and also a new proposal for the preservation of mobile home parks, which are important strategies in certain parts of the state. And then an additional $500 million allocation of tax credits as well that help to support the construction of many of our affordable housing projects in the state. I'm almost done. Healthcare affordability is another big part of this budget and has been a priority for the governor since day one. This budget is allocating making an investment to provide universal access to health coverage, regardless of immigration status. This is something that we've been working with the legislature over multiple years on, and this proposal would close the remaining gap, which was the 26 to 49-year-old individuals that are undocumented. The governor has also put forward a new Office of Healthcare Affordability proposal. We have to make progress on reducing healthcare costs. The governor has been working since day one on prescription drugs, and we continue to work on that. He talked quite a bit on Monday about insulin and really trying to make some progress there. But this office has a more foundational goal, which is to increase the transparency of pricing in the industry and also develop cost targets, including a system of financial accountability for failing to meet those targets. So really important structural work to stay focused on making sure we have an efficient and effective healthcare system. Homelessness, an issue that was probably one of the single largest investments last year. This budget was a $12 billion package to build permanent supportive housing and also to support local governments in all of the different strategies that they have deployed to help address this issue. We have $2 billion new this year that we see as a bit of a bridge, because some of those strategies that were funded last year are going to take a little bit of time to develop, especially behavioral health housing, a network of different types of housing to address individuals with behavioral health needs. We are proposing some quicker solutions, including strategies like tiny homes, also leasing or renting beds as well, with a specific focus on individuals on the streets with behavioral health needs. We also have $500 million proposal on encampment resolution. This is to support local governments as they work on moving encampments, individuals in encampments into appropriate housing, and all of the support to clean up what is left of those encampments. And then the last slide I will share, and I will turn it over to questions, is around crime. Obviously, many of you that have retail businesses are feeling this, have felt this. The governor takes this incredibly seriously and is putting additional money into grants to local law enforcement and DAs to hold these individuals accountable for these organized retail theft rings. We are also increasing the support at the CHP and also at the Attorney General's office to support these efforts, especially when they're multi-jurisdictional. That's where we can come in and help as well. We have a $20 million grant program for small businesses that have been victimized by retail theft. And then we, in addition to these strategies around the organized retail theft issues that we've been seeing across the nation and certainly here in California, we have additional proposals. One of them is 25 million for gun buyback programs matched with local governments, trying to get violent crime reduced. And then 20 million for our National Guard to support increased drug interdiction and really get at the opioid and fentanyl issues that are ravaging many parts of our state. So I will end there, but I've worked on a lot of budgets. This is certainly in the category of one of the good ones. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Keely, for that presentation. And there is a lot in there for businesses and employers in California to certainly be happy with and supportive of. So thank you for that. There's already questions lined up and I'm going to look at those right now, but I'll just kind of start off the questioning with a general question, I guess. There's obviously challenges when you have budget deficits, but there can also be challenges when you have surpluses. And now the governor's had a surplus for 2 years. I mean, a record surpluses for 2 years in a row to utilize and deal with. Just curious if you can share any reaction the governor had with regards to another budget surplus here and seeing that as a benefit or a challenge or perhaps both.
Oh, I mean, I definitely think he sees this as an absolute huge opportunity. It's allowing us to make a lot of investments and be thoughtful about some of these transitions that our regional economies are going through. I think the oil and gas example is one where the governor really pushed us hard to say, I want to get so much more specific about how we're going to help with this transition. I don't want to just say just transition. That's, kind of words until you're actually putting strategies in place. And so I think our ability to do that, is really because of surpluses like we've had. And especially all these investments in one-time monies for the drought, for wildfires. I didn't even speak about those things. I can't believe I didn't include those, but the drought and wildfire issues are just top of mind for all Californians, especially those that have been so impacted by the smoke in the recent years and have seen firsthand the devastation of those fires. We're able to make significant additional investments in wildfire prevention, but we're also continuing to invest in protection as well. The big challenge is always the ongoing versus one time, and we're very fortunate to have the surplus to be able to make a lot of these really smart one-time investments that are going to make us more resilient and provide more opportunity for individuals going forward. But we always have to be very careful about the ongoing commitments so that we can have as steady as she goes is how we like to be on the budget, and not be in a situation where we're having to roll lots of things back or look at increasing taxes. So those are the challenges, but the governor definitely sees this as a major opportunity, and really once in a lifetime opportunity. Right. in some cases.
Great. Okay, great. Well, I'm just going to go through the questions that I've received, and so we'll start with that. The first one comes in from Chris McKaylee. He says, we are pleased to see the governor's proposal to eliminate the cap on business tax credits and the suspension of the NOL deduction for their third year. However, considering the massive budget surpluses last year and this year, will the administration consider retroactively reinstating the full use of business credits and NOLs?
Thank you, Chris. We have not made that proposal. That obviously is, that would cost significantly more than I think what we have booked for this rollback 1 year early. So that's just not reflected in our budget. But I completely understand the position, and it was something we certainly reviewed. But it was not, at the end of the day, it didn't end up being in the proposal. So
great, thank you for that. Another question comes in from Jan Marier, who says, what is the long-term strategy if there is to continue to utilize remote work. And as we're all dealing with the surge, obviously, this is really a timely topic. And what would the budgetary savings look like from continuing to incentivize and utilize remote work?
Yeah, no, we are very much in progress as a state, and obviously the state government has a lot of different functions, and some of them have transitioned well, and some of them haven't transitioned at all because they don't make sense in that context. But we continue to work. Cal HR and the Department of General Services are both leading the long-term policies. They have put out a framework and asked departments to put together policies. There will be savings with relationship to leased space. The state government has long outgrown its own buildings and is certainly in a lot of leased space. So the first priority there, where we can, where people are transitioning to permanent remote work, will be to make some savings in our current footprint. But there is a lot that we're still working through on that. I know just as a manager of a department here, there is a lot to work through, and we're continuing to do that. And I think that you know, there are so many things that I think all of you are probably making considerations about in terms of how far away you're comfortable your employees, you know, not being able to get to the office within, you know, a few hours, you know, how far away can they live? But it's certainly, I think it's going to create some really interesting migratory changes, even within the state, that I know our demographics unit will be watching closely as they become more permanent plans around remote work. I know I miss the collaborative nature of in-person work still, but I also think that there are a lot of things that can be done, and we clearly have demonstrated that we can get work products done in this remote environment, but there's a lot still to work through. But I think lease cost is the big thing that we'll see savings by reducing our overall footprint in state government.
Great. Bob Naylor had a question on the gas tax pause.
Oh, yeah.
Included in the budget, and what kind of funding loss that
will
be.
So this is, so those of you that watched SB1 closely will remember that the gas tax component had this inflation, and diesel had this inflationary factor. So starting last year, the budget, the actual tax was adjusted for inflation. Given the inflationary pressures that all Californians are feeling right now, we are proposing to not make that adjustment, which would go into effect July 1. That would result in our estimates of about $523 million less money for transportation. That some of that flows to the state and some of that flows to locals. We are proposing to work on a proposal that keeps the local governments whole. And this again would be for 1 year, you know, hoping that inflation normalizes from where it's at right now, but that we would provide that small amount of relief in the interim. And obviously there are so many different components that go into, like, how does this affect the bottom line of a household? It really is quite dependent on a lot of different factors that quite overwhelm, frankly, just the inflation factor, you know, whether it's, you know, it's just the nature of how volatile energy prices are.
Catherine Asprey asked questions about the small business relief that's included in the budget. One, will there be more funds allocated to the COVID-19 small business relief program, grant program that was started last year? And then any other relief specifically that you can highlight for restaurants who are certainly struggling, we know, as a result of the surge. And then I'll just add on one other component, which would be an interesting data point to hear on that program, the grant relief program that was started last year, if you have any estimates or data on how many small businesses receive grants under that program.
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, but I know that it was very significant, and we have budgeted an additional 150 million for that program because, as I recall, there were some businesses that applied that ended up being waitlisted because we ran out of money. So that will be funded. That is proposed to be funded in the budget. It was, I know, a very significant program that we were able to help a lot of small businesses. I don't have the numbers. I will have to get back to you, get those numbers from GoBiz. So I apologize.
No problem. And then Rob Woodfree from Cal Chamber asked a question with regards to your job estimates returning to pre-pandemic levels by the end of 2022. Obviously, the labor shortage is something that all businesses are certainly feeling at this point. And so his question is, what is driving that estimate? How are you guys looking at that to see the jobs getting to that level at the end of 2022?
So, I mean, we look at a lot of different factors when we're putting together our economic estimates. We certainly are looking at national forecasts and then looking at specific conditions in the state as well. And so those improvements, I think, are partly based on, because it was an improvement from the May forecast. And it's really based on just some of that is based on what's happened in the interim. Again, those forecasts were put down before Omicron, so we didn't have this most recent surge. And I know, again, restaurants are really feeling it where a lot of people are just self-selecting not to go out to eat in person anyway. So there are a lot of components that go into that. In terms of the growth of those jobs. Certainly another area that I think we expect in the budget year that was going to come back more again with Omicron. Hard to know exactly what's going to happen is the tourism industry. That's been quite depressed because of really the complete shutdown of international tourism, which is so important, and we have such a vibrant industry around here in California. So that's another thing that, I'm talking about this is my doomsday economist hat on right now. But I mean, I probably don't have a lot without I would probably could have more specific answer with my economists on, but that is our current forecast based on what's happened since the April-May forecast from last year.
And before Omicron hit, yeah. Another point I just want to ask on that too. I mean, obviously you talked about childcare slots, and we saw, everybody saw as a result of the pandemic, the importance of that childcare support, the after school programs, things like that. A lot of workers obviously left the workforce in order to care for family needs, and some of them have yet to return probably because of the ongoing family responsibilities. With regards to those additional slots, and I think the goal you said was ultimately to get to 200,000, how close does that meet the demand need out there that the state's seeing with regards to providing that subsidy for childcare?
It's certainly going a long ways, and I think we don't have probably the type of analysis yet, but we should get there in the next couple of years about how the money that we're sending to school districts is going to actually translate into those additional supports. School districts are obviously under tremendous strains right now just to be able to have safe in-person instruction. And so some of the monies that we just were started last year, I think they're starting to get out there, but they haven't actually translated in I think a lot of cases into expanded program yet. And this is a significant increase. So last year we were able to put 1 billion ongoing. We're adding an additional 3.4 billion. I actually just happened to have a friend who runs some of the after school programs in a local school district, and she said the grant she got this year from last year's budget doubled the size of her program. And so, just like many of you, these school districts or these nonprofit providers are having to go out and hire people, get them on some very staff intensive job. And so there's a lot that's still in transition, but the goal is really to better support families and their ability to work. Also add those additional, enhanced, expanded learning opportunities for youth. And then also this year, new in this proposal is some one-time money, almost $1 billion, to specifically invest in things like arts and music, to better integrate those into these programming offerings as well. So between the childcare slots that we're funding and the massive investments in after school and summer programs, I think all of that is gonna help. Is it perfectly meeting the need? I can't answer definitively, but it is certainly going to go a long ways to support. There are also some provisions in the Build Back Better plan that would be quite significant in the area of childcare and for many more Californians, where childcare is not just a struggle for low-income families; it's a struggle for families at many levels of income, and so there are some significant proposals that have come forward at the national level that would be very complementary to what we're doing here.
Great. A question from Art Broom with regards to water and flood control agencies, he said, are on the front line with regards to a lot of climate change impacts, from sea level rise and atmospheric river storm flooding to drought, and obviously the loss of the Sierra snowpack, although we did get some good snow recently, but maybe not enough, obviously, to get us out of the drought. Is the administration open to additional investments needed to reconfigure our water supply system for the changed hydrology?
Yes, I mean, we have significant investment. So last year had this very large investment, multi-year investment in water infrastructure, and multiple different types of things. But certainly we're all tracking one of the major impacts of climate change is how and when we are getting our precipitation, and that really requires us thinking about fundamental changes to a lot of our historic systems that have protected property and people, and also have provided for our water supply. So those investments that were made last year are continuing and are embedded in this budget proposal. We do have a special additional $750 million specifically around drought strategies. And that includes $250 million that we've set aside for contingencies, given just how quickly the conditions changed last fall or last year. Of course, we've got in some parts of the state like 80% of our precipitation already, and that's great. And hopefully we'll get more before the end of the winter, especially in snowpack. That is really helpful to the water system. So, I mean, there's a lot in flight. We don't have additional flood control proposals in this budget, but there is a lot of money that was planned for last year that we're allocating the second year of funding opportunities. So there will be new funding opportunities in the budget year.
And then one last question that I have here is with regards to port congestion. And the question is there money in the budget for the DMV to register more truck drivers? And do we know what the wait list is right now, or how many truck drivers are waiting or available to help alleviate with the port congestion that we're having?
So we do have a $40 million proposal for the DMV, and it's got a strategy to increase Northern California and Southern California training centers. I don't have the most current information on the backlog, but I know that the idea here was to really lean in and figure out how to reduce that backlog, because that's something we very much can and should be doing here at the state to help with the critical shortages that have been occurring. So we have that's a major proposal in the DMV budget that is embedded here.
Awesome, great. Well, those are all of the questions that I received from the attendees in the audience, kind of jumped around all different policy areas. I just wanted to thank you and everyone again for attending today. Keely, this has been a great presentation, very informative. We appreciate your time being here, and thank you again for joining us here today.
It's my pleasure, and thanks again. And I will make sure and get back to Jennifer with a few of these follow-up questions. And just don't hesitate to reach out to us at the Department of Finance with any questions. We're always happy to explain or help you understand our perspective on some of these things. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe out there. We appreciate it. Take care. Bye-bye.